Well, since my last review was Arctic Rescue, I felt that Manta should be due for review as well. Opening in 2012, Manta was the second roller coaster by Mack Rides to feature an LSM launch. It's also the first major roller coaster by this manufacturer here in the United States. They have built other roller coasters, mainly the Wild Mouse, but Manta was a first in its own right. Located at SeaWorld San Diego, the park is challenged by a local height ordinance, meaning that the rides aren't allowed to be built taller than the surrounding trees without special clearances. Well, Manta features a really tight footprint. Its max height is only 30 feet, with the largest drop being 54 feet. The ride features 2,800 feet of track, max speed of 43 miles per hour, and 2 launches. Before we dive into this review, please do me a favor by clicking on that like button, and if you love roller coaster reviews, make sure to subscribe. Presentation. If there is one thing I can say about Manta, is how well it has been incorporated into the park. The first portion of the ride dives in and out of trenches, wraps around the aquarium, and then later in the ride gets close to a flamingo exhibit. The ride starts off by entering a tunnel. Inside the pitch black, there are projections on the wall mimicking the sensation of you swimming through the ocean. Unfortunately, the projections were past their prime in desperate need of an upgrade. My first ride, I sat up in the front row. I just assumed because of the small amount of light bleeding into the tunnel and being somewhat out of range of those projections, I was unable to see them. Well, our second ride, we were smack dab in the middle and with little to no change. Basically, the images are way too dim. If the park improves this swimming effect, the ride intro and launch would improve immensely. If it wasn't for this tunnel, I would be apt to give this coaster a higher score in presentation, but until that tunnel is fixed, I'm settling on a score of 9 for presentation. Ride intensity. With Manta being a family roller coaster, I'm not going to put that much emphasis on ride intensity, but let's dissect this topic, shall we? As I mentioned already, the roller coaster starts off in a dark tunnel. The train slowly moves back and forth for a few seconds until the launch gate raises, letting in a burst of sunshine, and the next thing you know it, the LSMs kick in, and you're launching up to or near the ride max speed. Surprisingly, of all the Mack roller coasters that I've been on, this has the strongest launch of the bunch by far. After the launch, the coaster takes a sweeping turn to the right, diving down into a trench. The coaster then rises up into a turnaround element that wraps around the ride entrance sign. The coaster takes a turn to the left that leads right into an airtime hill. This is where you will experience the best airtime moment on the ride. After another turn, the coaster rises up into another airtime hill, this one less intense than the last one. The train performs a twisted airtime hill that leads into another turn to the right into the second launch. Unfortunately, the train comes to an abrupt pause. It slams on the brakes, but it doesn't bring the train to a complete halt. You slowly roll onto the launch, then similar to the first launch, the train bursts up to its max speed, slamming into a 100-degree turn to the left. The train rises up into one more airtime hill, though the trims might slow the train down a little bit more than desired. The ride then performs a couple snappy turns and twists before ending on the brake run. Even though this ride is intended for the whole family, I feel the 2 launches and a couple of those snappy turns make this a little bit more intense than your average family coaster. With that said, I'm not going to break a 5 score for intensity. To me, this is the maximum amount of oomph I would expect out of a family coaster. Fun factor. As someone who loves family attractions, multi-launching, and that tight low-to-the-ground terrain coaster, my expectations were a little too high for Manta. Did I enjoy this roller coaster? Yes, but I was kind of hoping for a little more. Earlier in the year, I rode Big Bear Mountain at Dollywood and was expecting a ride experience more like that one. Heck, I rode Arctic Rescue about 30 minutes prior to Manta and just assumed that they would be very similar, if not Manta would be the better coaster. Overall, those 2 roller coasters are pretty similar, except Manta has more airtime moments, which I would argue that Arctic Rescue has none. Fun factor is going to earn a score of 7, and a few reasons that hold us back from being higher. First would be the tunnel. If they would just fix that part of the ride, then this coaster shoots up in ranking. Second is that abrupt pause prior to the second launch. Any fun that you were having is instantly snatched from you by a quick gut punch from the restraint. Finally, though I will discuss this again, the ride has a rattle. Similar to what I said about Arctic Rescue in its review, the park was not busy when I was there, so Manta was a complete walk-on. So it's kind of hard to rank their operations. The nice thing though, the ride features a pretty long queue, so once you exit the coaster, there is a gate that will let you walk right back into the station. This is only used when the park is slow like the day I visited. Now if I can only convince Kennywood to do this for Phantom's Revenge. Originality. When a roller coaster is faced with tough obstacles, I feel this becomes an opportunity for the ride designer to push the limits and be creative with a layout. For the most part, I would say that this is true with Manta. I love how this ride dives in the ground, using the terrain to interact with. It's also a fun coaster to watch from the midway. The coaster uses a variety of elements that have airtime and laterals, always a nice mix for a family roller coaster. Originality will earn a score of 9. Ride Smoothness. I've already mentioned that Manta has a rattle, and it's kind of a puzzling one. The coaster is about 12 years old, but I thought it would be butter smooth since it's a family coaster. Well, the track is smooth, but it feels like the train is going to fall apart the way each piece of the train is rattling. I know it's not going to fall apart, but that's just how it feels. Thankfully, the restraints on this roller coaster are quite comfortable, so even with a rattle, it's not really a problem. Ride Smoothness earns a score of 8. Alright, the final technical score for Manta comes to 7.6, which lands somewhere in my good roller coaster ranking. I believe that in my ranking video of all the coasters at SeaWorld San Diego, I have this one marked as middle of the road. Looking back, I might have been a little underserving to this coaster, but honestly I guess it just depends. My personal score, considering that this is a family coaster, I will rank my personal score with a curve. I put this at a 7.5. It's a fine coaster that I wouldn't mind riding again, I just wish it was better than it is. If the park does make those couple changes, like improving the tunnel and fixing the rattle, I could see this coaster moving higher up in my rankings and being one of my favorite family coasters. Until then, it sits lower than Arctic Rescue as my third favorite roller coaster at SeaWorld San Diego. Until next time, this is X-Screen Thrills.